Let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful for this time that we have to study and for the light that has been coming to this movement, to your people who are searching for light, and that we see things much more clearly than we did before July 18th. We understand more of Millerite history. We understand more of your love and the way that you work, and we understand the message that we have to give. But we know, Lord, that more light is going to be poured out, and we just ask that we can walk in the light that you've given us so that we can see greater light. Thank you for each person who participates or watches the videos. We ask that you can guide their minds and be with us here now as we open your word together. Thank you for hearing our prayer, and we ask and pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So this week I have a different camera and microphone. So the microphone picks up more of the room sound, but it doesn't have the problem of me moving around, that it's, quieter or louder. Whether it's better or not, that's a whole other question, but we'll find out. But we're going to try it out this week for this series. Now, I gave you some notes. I sent some notes, and most of you have them already. That's the Joseph paper by a guy named Johannes Koletsky, a German who put this paper together in April of 2010. And what I'm going to do, I'm not going to do a detailed study on these chiasms. I'm going to look at an application. And I'm also going to try to address how we teach and what we can do to teach people these things and the importance of them as we relate them to our time, and how we tie all of prophecy together with these chiasms. So I've gone over these things in the past, and so I'm not going to try to replicate what I did before, but I'm going to look at the details, and especially as it relates to July 18th and to our present situation. Now, what I recommend people do is that you go through these papers, either the paper on Joseph, or either, if you want to, the paper on the joining of the two sticks. So the two sticks paper has a lot of information about chiasms in it. It goes into obviously more detail than the paper from 2010, because at that time we understood very little. But the nice thing about his paper, Koletsky's paper, is he's a German, and he goes through things in really nice detail and very nicely organized and very ordered. So for some people, that paper will be really easy to follow. I tend to jump steps, and I don't add as much detail, and I add the wrong details and so forth in my paper. But mine has a lot of other things in it as well. But if you want to understand the line of Joseph, I suggest that you go through Koletsky's paper first, and then if you want more detail, then you can go through my paper. But my suggestion is that people practice drawing these lines, because that's one of the things that one of the ways we learn is by drawing these lines, and then you need to share them with other people. So okay, so I'm going to draw out the line. So I'm not going to go through all the scripture references, but they're pretty easy to follow. For anybody who has these notes, in the book of Genesis, this chronology is quite well known. There are some differences of opinion about certain details, especially dealing with Jacob and when he got married. That would probably be the main difference. It doesn't overall affect the structure of the chiasms, because we know when Joseph was born, and his birth is the important one in that context. But one of the things, I'm just going to draw this up here, and so the chiasms of Jacob and Joseph. I mean, we could call it the chiasm of Abraham as well. But one of the things we know is there's this 430 years, which I'm not necessarily going to address in detail here, but it's just when that they spend, we just need this as a reference, Canaan and Egypt, and this 430 years, which is well established. It's note 3 in the books Patriarchs and Prophets, I believe, or note 3. I don't think it's note 6. It could be. And we know that when Abraham leaves Haran, and then this is this period of time until Joseph and his family meet together here in Egypt. So this is Jacob coming into Egypt. So you got Abraham, Isaac, and then Jacob entering Egypt. And then, of course, you have the Exodus over here in 1533. And so this is 1748, 1748 BC. So these are all BC dates. And this detail Koletsky never had as far as the dates of this. If he had, he would have noticed some of the things that we noticed. So here Jacob enters Egypt. And then we know this is the Exodus. And these, of course, are periods of 215 years. If you just did the math, you would see that. And this is a chiasm. And the place where I usually start with this is Genesis 15. That's when Abraham is given the 400 years and the 4th generation. And then there are another passage, which is, can't remember the passage, it's in Exodus, where it talks about the 430 years, and then also in Galatians. So there's 2 passages, and they're easy to look up in the scriptures regarding this period of 430 years. Many people assume that there's 400 years in Egypt or 430 years in Egypt, but the sojournings of the children of Israel are 430 years. And of course, in the context that we think of that, we would think, well, Jacob's children, but it's actually including this whole generation, or all these generations here. This period here, this first 4 generations, and then the next 4 generations. and we've worked through that before in other studies. So what we're going to look at here is just basically this first part. So we know when Abram leaves Haran, that's Abram, and he's 75 years old. And then it's going to be 25 years later that Isaac is born. So at Isaac's birth, Abraham is 100. And then you're going to have 60 years until Jacob is born. And then you're going to have, so I'm kind of jamming this in here, but you're going to have, when Jacob's 77, he's going to start working for Laban. And there's these 2 periods of 7 years. So one, he works for Leah, even though he's thinking he's working for Rachel. And then he has to do another 7 years. And we know that he's 84 when he gets married. And then he's 91 years old when Joseph is born. So probably could have made this all a little bit smaller and gave myself more room for here. So that's probably what I need to do. I'm going to do this again just because it'll be better. You know, and again, you need to know the verses for this, which are in the papers. And Abram 75 when he leaves Haran. So you've got this 25 years here. You're going to have 60 years here. You're going to have 77 years here. Then you're going to have the 2 periods of 7 years. And then we're going to deal with this chiasm of Joseph. So I don't need to write in Isaac's birth, Jacob and Esau are born, I guess. Obviously they're twins. And one of the things about this history is all of the doublings. So there's all these doublings that occur in this history, which I find extremely fascinating that these things occur. Now, does everybody see on my computer, I did some stuff to it and everything looks backwards on it. Everything looks the right direction, I would assume. It's just weird looking at it as a mirror image. I must have made it a mirror image on my laptop. I don't definitely want to record it as a mirror image. So I'm not sure how that works. And I'm gonna, it's just so weird. Apologize for that. Oops, I stopped the video. Okay. That probably doesn't affect anything in the recording, but it just doesn't look right. Okay, so we have these doublings that occur. And obviously with Leah and Rachel, these 2 periods of 7 years are extremely important in this story. Obviously the 7 times, it is suggested the 25-20. We know that we have used these as types that we paralleled them. Leah, we would parallel with Belshazzar, and Rachel, we would parallel with Nebuchadnezzar in the context of the 25-20. So the 7 times that we have in the book of Daniel comes from this. But these periods of 7 years back to back, being a period of 14 years, obviously occurs in the story of Joseph as well. So it's a doubling of this doubling. But you have the twins, you have the 2 wives. There are stories that happen to Abraham and Isaac, where they both run into Abimelech, a different Abimelech, in their histories. So there's lots of things that happen in pairs. And of course, one of the important things is here, after 17 years, we're going to have, so Joseph is born here. But when he's 17 years old, he's going to have his 2 dreams. Now, one of the things about this story is there's a familiarity that people have with it. And it's always been one of the most fascinating stories of Scripture. Now, so because it's familiar to people, putting it on the line and adding some of these details that people may not have noticed, I think is an extremely powerful witness of what we have discovered as we relate to different truths that God has revealed to us. And the thing about this story is obviously it's setting us up and giving us a background for later applications that we have made. One is the symbolism. So obviously here, you know, the 77 years, and then he works for 7 years and 7 years. The symbolism that he has 12 sons, and then when he's married, he's 84, and 12 times 7 is 84. Now, if you count Diana's birth, not Diana, Dinah's birth, I think that's her name. In here, there's 12 children born in here that are mentioned in Scripture. Obviously, the 12th son, Benjamin, is born after the 7 years because Joseph is older and he's born at the end of that 7 years. So you have Dinah that's in this story. There's just lots of symbolism regarding the numbers. So, 12 times 7 is 84. And of course, the 2 sevens in 77 when he begins working for Laban. Now, this also becomes important, this number here, 17. Now, one of the things Koletsky brings out, that when I had studied it, I hadn't thought of everything that he had done, and he hadn't thought of everything that I had done, but he really focuses upon the structure of this chiasm and how it relates to this chiasm. So what we're going to have is we're going to have Joseph's 2 dreams, and then 11 years later, we're going to have the baker and the butler. Now, they, of course, have 2 dreams, each one dream, but together it's 2 dreams. And as Joseph says, your 2 dreams, they're basically the same idea. They both represent 3 days, and one's going to lose his head, and the other's going to be returned to his butlership. So there are prophecies and these predictions that have these 3 days attached to them. Was taught as about the prediction before midnight. And one of the things that we're going to be looking at in these chiasms is understanding that, the prediction before midnight and how it relates. Because when we get to Samuel Snow's letters, which we've already covered, but again, this is about how to teach these things, and then how they relate to our time. So there are things that when we first, in this message, when we first study this story, we see it as a reform line, and we're going to look at that to some degree. But much of what we understand now, we couldn't have seen in this story because we just didn't have a clue about these things and how they fit together. Now, we're going to have, of course, these 2 dreams here, and then we know that there's going to be this period of 2 years. And in this period of 2 years, this is from when Joseph interprets the butler and baker's dreams, and then Pharaoh's birthday. And on Pharaoh's birthday, we're going to have Pharaoh's 2 dreams. I don't know, I always spell Pharaoh wrong. So I try to spell it the opposite way, I think, how I should spell it, and then usually I'm right. So Pharaoh's 2 dreams, and we know that there's going to be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine, and then there's going to be a period of 12 years over here, which I'm going to deal with later. And I guess I should, here, I'll do it this way. So we're going to have, I'm just going to make this a little bit shorter. So you have 7 years of plenty, and then we're going to have 7 years of famine, and it's going to be divided into 2 and 5 years, and then you're going to have these 12 years here. So when we get to this becomes the center of a chiasm. So this is the center. And that is, this is 11 years from here to here. And this is 17 years from here to here. And we can see that this is mirroring this 17 years and this 11 years. And the way that this is understood by Koletsky, that I think is very observant, is that this is the transition from Canaan to Egypt. So this transition from Canaan to Egypt is where Joseph is separated from his family. Now, obviously here, Joseph and Jacob are together in Canaan. And over here, Joseph and Jacob are together in Egypt. So here, in this period, we have Jacob is in Canaan, and Joseph is in Egypt. So this transition period here has this chiastic structure. And you could just look at, there's 11 years and 11 years. We know that that's 22 years. And Joseph has his 2 dreams, and then his 2 dreams are fulfilled. And 22 and 220 are symbols of restoration. And so obviously this 22 years applies here as a chiasm on its own. But then adding these 17 years and these 17 years, which is the thing that I wouldn't have noticed without Koletsky's. Well, maybe I would have noticed it eventually, but I didn't notice it at first, becomes an extremely powerful part of this chiasm. Now, what this ended up showing us over here, when we're dealing with these dates here, we can see that this is going to be the time that they actually enter. So Jacob enters Egypt. And we had this as 1748 BC. And you would just take 17 years off that to get 1731 BC. Now, when this was discovered by us, when we rediscovered this in 2016, this became part of a bigger structure. Now, which I'm going to show you, and I did send you a picture of it, dealing with the 252. But what we want to show people and what we want to understand is that this structure of this chiasm is something that is this fingerprint dealing with this covenant. And we know that because Jesus confirms the covenant with many for 1 week. So we're going to be studying this as well. So this 3.5 years and 3.5 years that's on the 1863 chart, where it just basically looks like that. It looks a little bit different, but it basically just gives that information as the 1 week, it calls it. This is the confirming of the covenant. And it came out in one of our... What's that?
Should be 27 AD and 31 in the middle.
Yes, thank you. That's just me writing while I'm thinking about something else. So obviously 31 AD isn't listed when you look at it on the 1863 chart. They don't write 31 AD in the center, but that's obvious that it's there. And so this confirming the covenant in the 1 week, we had studied Samuel Snow's letters, and we're going to get into that this week again and look at some of this detail. But we know that his July 18th publication of his last letter contained this article called Confirming the Covenant. It was dealing with this 1 week. And that, of course, July 18th relates to our history. And so one of the reasons that we look at this, so, you know, we know where we are at now. We know what we have concluded. What we don't fully understand is how we got there. And that's partly because many people weren't on that journey that I was on. Stephen was part of that journey of discovering these things long before they became prominent in the message. That is, we were coming to understand these Old Testament prophecies and these Old Testament histories, and we then could see those histories in Millerite history. So we found these structures in Millerite history, but then we found these structures in our history. And so the July 18th prediction wasn't based upon mathematical manipulation of numbers. It came as a result of studying things that we already knew to be true, and seeing this pattern of history. And then we came up with these dates. And then afterward, we began to analyze not just the dates that we had now, but dates in the past. So one of the things we see here in this 1711, 1117 chiasm is that we have this here, 17 times 11. And everybody should know what this is because it's 187. And 187, of course, is a symbol of July 18th. Now, this was in this history in 2016. We had these numbers, but we didn't see this significance. And of course, it's doubled too. Now, we also have this number 11 and 17, and I'm going to bring this up here because I want to make sure I do it right. Oops. So we can look at it as 1117 or 1711, depending on how we want to look at it. But as the number 1117, so if I took, instead of 1711, I took this, 1117, and I just wrote it as a number, and I looked up this number, I would find that it's the 187th prime number. So this is the 187th prime, which to me is pretty bizarre, that because there are not other numbers where you can take the two ways that number can be divided, take away that number can be divided, and write it as a number instead of, you know, a division, the divisors, and write it as a number, and then it actually gives you the number that as a prime. So this is a prime number. There's only, you know, not every number is a prime number. So this is 187th prime. So it's a very interesting mathematical analysis, but it's not how we derived July 18, 2020. This is something that we can look back in this story. So we didn't go here and say, oh, we can take 17 times 11 and we can get 187. So we should look for a date that's July 17th or July 18th based upon that. You know, this is things that were after the fact. And these details, which Stephen and I love, and Odilio, and some other people really like them, there are features that can be shown later on. But maybe depending on the person that you're presenting to, some of these little details become meaningful. But if all they know is the mathematical sort of, what we would, you know, some people criticize as mathematical manipulations, if that's all they understand about these prophecies, they're not going to be very well founded. So in looking at this story, one of the things that we're seeing is we show them this chiasm, and you can show it in the appendix, as I said, of patriarchs and prophets. So that gives it, you know, some validity. It's not something that, you know, we just found. This is something that's well established. Now, there are people who have different views on this, but I have spent time showing that these are not really possible, that you couldn't really fit the period here based on the ages that are given of the sons of Levi. You couldn't fit that in a period of 430 years or even 400 years unless they had their children when they were really, really old. So, which makes no sense. So anyway, we have this history, and also the fourth generation. So you have to have 4 generations. If you know, a lot of people try to put way more generations in there. So there's just all these different problems that arise when you try to make this 400 years in Egypt or 430 years in Egypt. So trying to establish this isn't that difficult from the scriptures. You can find the age, how old Isaac was when when his wife gives birth to Jacob and Esau. You can do some of these based on how old Joseph is when he's sold into slavery. They're going to tell you that in the scriptures. they're going to tell you how old he was when Jacob gets into Egypt, and how old he was when he interprets Pharaoh's dreams. He's 30 years old. And so he's 39 here. And so you can go through this whole history from the scriptures quite simply. And in sharing this with other people, my view is that you don't go as quickly as I do. And you don't necessarily go in as much detail as I do. You take your time with that individual person who has these interests in these things. And some of these things, it's some things you can present in a very short period of time, and you can spark an interest. So I remember back in 2018 at our family reunion, I showed this to my nephew. And to him, who's a Pentecostal, I mean, this just came alive. He said, I would never have seen this just reading the Bible. And so the fact that you can show these things to people, and people who have a spiritual interest, and he's a guy who reads the Bible. He was basically just reading the Bible all the time. So, he would say, okay, this is really fascinating. We need to do this. We need to start drawing things on lines and putting stories on lines so that we can, see these details that we wouldn't have noticed. But this structural chiasm here becomes this transition. But we see it's at the end of this chiasm that it lines up to the center of this chiasm. So, or the end of this 22 years, the center chiasm of 22 years lines up then with the center of this chiasm. So obviously all the chiasms don't line up in the center because they couldn't move on in history. And so this story of Joseph becomes this transition, but it's here at the end of these 22 years, where they now are going to line up. So you have to kind of keep this in your mind. And if anybody has thoughts on this, we're gonna, I can, you can email me or you can ask me a question now regarding it. But yeah, I'm erasing it all. So now, last night in the study that we had at Collins, he brought up something which he had shown us before, and he kind of mentioned it in passing, and then I said, well, I don't remember what you're talking about, and so I want to know what that's about. Now, in a sense, I'm looking ahead at some of our studies in doing this, but one of the things about Joseph and Christ, that we all know that they're parallel, so I'm going to get to that in a minute, what he was talking about. But we know that, you got Joseph, he's 30 years old, and Jesus is 30 years old, and then they're going to have a period of time begin. And that period of time here in the story of Joseph is this 7 years of plenty, right? So you're going to have plenty here. Now, in the story of Christ, we would look at this history, and so Joseph has, he goes to Pharaoh, he has these two dreams, and so you're going to have this 7 years here. And then in the story of Christ, you're going to have 7 years here as well. But in this story, this is going to be divided. That's that 1 week. And this is the 7 years of plenty. This is confirming the covenant with many for 1 week. So Christ has this week on earth, or half a week on earth and half in heaven. Right? So he's confirming that covenant. And in the midst of the week, he's crucified. And then in the story of Joseph, we have the famine. And that famine is divided into 2 years. And that's, of course, the center of the chiasm at the end of that 2 years. And then there's a period of 5 years. And so this 2 and this 5 become an important part of our structure. And I know Stephen has dealt with this as well. Now, when we look at this then in the time of Christ, We would mark this as 34 AD. But then we also have this structure of the famine. So you're going to have 7 times 252. So just, I mean, I could explain this in a more detailed way. But we have this 2 and 5. And this I had discovered in 2014 in analyzing the 70-week prophecy. I noticed that when it ends, there's 504 years to 538. And then there's these 1,260 years to 1798. I mean, I didn't discover that necessarily. We already knew this. But it was this 504 years, which was 2 times 252. And then this 1260 that is 5 times 252. And so this 2 and 5 that we see in the story of Joseph, we also see this 2 and 5 here in the story of Christ. So we have it in the story of Joseph 2 and 5 years, but now we have it, but obviously this 7 years is literally 7 years, but this is this bigger period, but it's still divided in 2 and 5 into this ratio. Now, so I had discovered this part here, this structure, that it was 2 times 252, before I had discovered this structure here in the story of Joseph, and before I related them together. So it was in 2016 then that when I counted out this period of years from 34 AD to 1798, which became 1,764 years, and that's just basically adding 252 to 1260, and am I doing that backwards? So if you add 1260, 252, or to 504, that's right, that's what I'm doing. So I always do that. So it's 1,764 years. And that's because I'm adding 252 to 1260. So that would be 700 and
you're adding 504 to 12.
504 to 1260. And so that would give, so I'm just adding a 5 here and a 4 there. That's how I did it.
Or 7 times 252.
Yes. So again, it's 7 times 252. So what Stephen had suggested is that I count this backwards. So this period of time here, he just says, well, what if we go backwards? So when we go backwards, 1,764 years, we come to this date, 1731 BC. Now, of course, I had erased that line, but I can draw this part of it up here again. And so if I put these 12 years in here, and I know that this is 1748, this chiasm ends in 1731 BC. So this is the death of Jacob when he's 147 years old. And so this was fairly interesting, this idea back in 2016, that I could also have this 7 times 252 and create this chiasm where 34 AD becomes the center of this chiasm. And we all know that the center of a chiasm, so it starts to get a little bit messy here, but the center of a chiasm becomes a turning point, but it's also, I more think of it as a key. It's a key that unlocks the significance of the chiasm. Now, if we look at the story of Joseph here, and we know that the center of this chiasm is here when, in the story of Jacob, when Jacob comes into to Egypt, and it finishes that period of 22 years from when Joseph is sold into slavery. We know then that this becomes the center of this, and this is Canaan in Egypt. So obviously the center of this, it becomes this key that unlocks this whole 430 years of this sojourning of the children of Israel. We see that there's this center of this chiasm. And so the chiasms have events at the beginning and the end, but it's this that unlocks it. Without this event, this doesn't really have the significance. You know, you could say there's 430 years, but you need these two 215-year periods. But there's also the significance of what this is about. This is about the promised land. And when we get to the Exodus, we know, of course, that they have left Egypt and they're heading to the promised land. So this is about this promise that's made to Abraham, about his seed, about the 4 generations, about the period of persecution. And all these things are tied up in this whole structure. But it's Jacob entering Egypt that is the important central point of this structure. So when we get here and we get to 34 AD and we say, well, what is this about? Well, this is an extension of this, obviously. So we have this structure, and it's an extension of this. It's connected to this, because this is about the covenant that's made with Abraham. So, you know, one of the things that we see is this becomes rather involved. That is, if you're teaching this to someone, you have to consider what they understand. But as we look at these things, they're extremely deep. That is, there's so many different connections. And what you have to decide is what you're going to focus upon when you're telling this story, based upon the person's interests and their background and the understanding that they already have. You know, some people would be very familiar with this Jesus and Joseph typology, that Joseph is a type of Christ. Seventh-day Adventists should be familiar with it, but not all are. But these are things that you can normally show people, and they're not going to be able to argue against them. That is, they're going to see that there's this structure. And for a Seventh-day Adventist who already accepts the 70 weeks that end in 34 AD and the 1260 years, if they do accept that, or even if they have questions about it, when they see this structure here, that becomes fairly powerful. Now, this part where I go back to 731 BC, well, they don't know all this chronology. So, you know, unless somebody is really antagonistic in debating you, they might argue against this. Well, how do you know? You know, because if they look it up online and they see when, you know, Joseph and Jacob lived, I mean, they're going to see the Exodus not even in 1533. They're going to see it at probably the latest, you know, the mid 1400s BC. But a lot of people even put it later into the 1200s BC, which makes no sense based on the scripture. So you're going to see different views regarding this chronology. So, you know, depending on the person, you have to decide how much of this information that you're going to share with them. Now, if you look at Joseph Koletsky's, he then takes this structure and he just parallels it both with this structure and also with this structure, 723 BC, 538 AD, and 1798. So he takes these two 1260s, that's his main argument, and that he's showing that this is giving us this structure and this structure, which are, of course, these chiasms. So this chiasm here, that's his main argument, is regarding these chiasms. But when he sets this up and he shows you the 1260 and he shows you this, one of the things that you can see is that there is this structure related to what we already know as Seventh-day Adventists' established prophecy, that gives us this 7 times 252 and relates to this history. So we can show them something about this history that they can see that relates to stuff that is already understood by us. So these things are already understood as far as the time periods, just not how we analyze them. And so when we can see this parallel between Christ and Joseph, we have taught them a lot. And if they see this and see that it's truth, we're 95% there as far as them understanding this message. Because we have used a series of methods of comparison of scripture and of structure that has illustrated how we arrived at all of our conclusions. And that's why this is important. You know, if we can go back into the past and show them things that are established, that, I mean, obviously they can argue against anything, but not if you really look at the scriptures. You can't argue against this structure, and you can't argue against this structure. And if you're a Seventh-day Adventist and you know that these prophecies exist, at least, even if you don't necessarily agree with them, you would have to at least admit, well, that fits very nicely with what Seventh-day Adventists teach. But even for non-Adventists, I find this extremely powerful. Even when they don't know about the 70 weeks per se, and they're not aware of the 1260 years. But when I show them this, they see this structure in this amazing way. Now, when it comes to this 1764 years then that goes back, Koletsky doesn't deal with that because he doesn't know this date. So he doesn't have this chronology. So he doesn't deal with that part of it. But he does deal with another part of it. And that, of course, is that he can then go back to 723 BC, and he can see that there's 5 times 252 here, that's 1260, and there's 2 times 252. So he knows in order for this to be 5 times 252, there has to be a 3 times 252 here. So when you go from 723 BC to 34 AD, you then have this 1260 years, but it's divided up in this way, and this is 756 years. So and basically you're just adding 723 to 34 AD and then subtracting 1 because there's no 0 year, but there's a 0 in your math. So this 756 years, when I had, found this structure and I found these 3 times 252s back in 2014, obviously I didn't understand their relationship to the story of Joseph because I hadn't studied that yet. But I could see that there was this structure here, and that these 2 1260s that make up the 2520 for Northern Israel, this is a strong testimony as to its structure. But I'm going to have to erase this again. So now when we had that whole structure, so we're going to have to do this whole line, but it's obviously a pretty big line. Question?
I have a question, but
Okay, your voice is a little strange. It's breaking up a bit.
I have a question, but I wanted to ask, how do we build the 252?
Okay, what are you asking?
I was asking how we develop the 252 that you multiply by 2 and by 5. The 252. Can you just? I'm
Okay,
asking
so
how we develop the
504
252.
years. So all it is an analysis of. We know that the 1260 is 1260 years, but we could also divide it into 5 times 252. And then when we look at from 34 AD to 538, that's 504 years. So it's also 2 times 252. So in doing that, we're just simply analyzing something we already know. We know the period of time. You can see it's 504 years, but you can also see it's 252 times 2. And then we can relate that to the story of Joseph. We can see that in the story of Joseph, this 7 years of famine relates to this period of persecution, first by pagan Rome for 504 years, and then by papal Rome for 1260 years. And so that famine period in the story of Joseph has this ratio of 2 and 5. And the famine period in Christ has the same ratio, but in order to put it in the same ratio, we have to multiply it by 252. And 252, of course, is 1/10 of a 25/20. The thing that often you can realize is that you can present the 25/20 to someone without actually presenting the 25/20. That is, you can take the story of Joseph, you can lay out these lines, you can show them the chiasms, and as you progress in presenting this to a person, you can then connect, in the story of Joseph, that ratio of the 2 and the 5 of the famine, as you line it up with Christ, Joseph, and Jesus. And then you can show that that structure exists in something we already understand. That is, an Adventist should know 34 AD, and they should know 538, and they should know 1798. And so you can show that that same ratio exists, but it's multiplied by 252. You don't have to mention the 25/20. You know, it's 1/10 of the 25/20, but you can show them that 25/20. And then what you do, what I had done there is I had dealt with this, you know, so you have the 1260, you have the 504, and then I just went back to finish this off, showing that this is 1260, and that if this is 1260, this is 756 years, and that this is the captivity of Manasseh, or not Manasseh, Hoshea. So you have the captivity of Hoshea, you have 34 AD, you have 538, and you have 1798. And so this part Adventists would all accept, but you can basically fit this in and show that there's this other 1260. So what you've shown them is you've shown them the 25/20, but you don't have to do this, right? You can just show them the 3 times 252, the 2 times 252, and the 5 times 252. So you can show them this part of the structure before you ever talk about the 25/20. Now, you could even do this, you know, these are both 1260s, and then you can show that this is parallel to Christ's chiasm, right? So Christ has this chiasm as well, so obviously it's not in proportion. But you have the cross and you have the chiasm of Christ. And then you can say, well, this is 7 years, and this is 1260 days, and this is 1260 days. So you showed them the 25/20, but you haven't mentioned the 25/20. That is, you mentioned 252 as an analysis because of the story of Joseph. And then you can relate these periods of time saying, you know, this is about northern Israel, and northern Israel, Hoshea is taken captive in 723. This marks the end of northern Israel. And then you can even deal with, you know, if you want to, you know, the rise of the United States, that it's a 2-horn power. Northern Israel has the 2 horns, Dan and Bethel, church and state. You know, there's lots of details that could be added. But what I'm saying is that you don't have to do that. You don't have to show everything all at once. You can show them bits and pieces, and you can watch how people recognize and see things that make sense. And once people start to see that this makes sense, that there is something about this, as you start to add more details, they will question them. I'm not saying that they shouldn't question them, but they will have something to found their beliefs upon that aren't just us telling them the conclusions. That we show them how we came to things, and you just stay as much as you can with the things that are really clear and obvious to the person. So in doing this, you know, you don't have to finish off, you know, well, this is 25/20, and therefore, you know, this is this 25/20. But you could, you know, as a person, based on how they accept things, you could show them Hiram Edson's articles and say, you know, he calls these the times of the Gentiles. You could show that this is a Daniel 12 verse 7, and this is Daniel 7 verse 25. So that, you know, this is the treading down, or this is the treading down, and this is the scattering. So They're tread underfoot, 40 and 2 months. You can go to Revelation. But this is about the scattering of the power of the holy people. So, when Hoshea is taken captive, this 1260 years until the papacy begins, this is prophetic based on this. So, but even in all that, I still don't need to say 1260 plus 1260 is 2520. You understand what I'm saying? I'm thinking about how I present things to people as a foundation for them to understand this message. Because one is, we need this foundation because we don't really understand this message. That is, we know the conclusions, and we may have studied and have some idea about these things, but we've believed that we've come to those conclusions using numbers, and what we did as the analysis, instead of realizing that we used prophecy that is established. Now, sure, we have analyzed these in this way, but that's not a very complicated analysis. That's not doing a bunch of weird things with math. It's not, looking at prime numbers or anything like that. It's not multiplying two numbers together that are periods of time to come up with another number. It's something that can easily be seen, can easily be shown to a person. So, good question. And hopefully that answers your question. If that's the question that you meant, based on what you said.
Yeah,
Now,
that's clear. That's clear.
okay, good. Now, so when we go back and we place this whole line here, we know that in this line we have this 430 years. So I'm just going to write here, there's 430 years. And so the Israelites here in 1533, they come out of Egypt, and then they're going to wander for 40 years in the wilderness. And this was something that it took me a while to sort of accept, but this is the view of the rabbinic Jews, is that there's 2 periods of 7 years. So the first period is the time that it takes them to possess the land. And the second period of 7 years is the time that it takes them to have rest from their enemies. So they have this as a period of 14 years that occurs as 2 periods of 7 years. And of course, we know in this 430 years that you have the 2 years and the 5 years, and then you have the 7 years, right? So you have 2 periods of 14 years, and you have it in the story of Leah and Rachel. And so these 2 periods of 7 years, some scholars have just said, well, this is Jewish tradition. But actually, if you look at their arguments and how they establish this, it's very sound. So it's rather complicated to sort through the ages of Caleb and Joshua and all these different events to fit this in. It's not like something that I could just show you in 2 minutes. But basically, if you look at how they have come to this conclusion, it wasn't based upon numerology or anything. They actually just analyzed the history and said that these are 2 periods of 7 years. So obviously this makes a period of 54 years here. Now, when we look at this in the context of, well, I guess here is the way to look at this. How do I do this? I'm trying to remember how I do this analysis. So it has to do with this end time here. So remember this, in this story of Joseph, we had that period of 1731 BC. That's when Jacob dies. And we know that's a period of 215 years from when Jacob enters Egypt to when Israelites leave Egypt, right? So you have 215 years. And this period of time here is a period of 17 years. So that's how we'll look at this. Is a period of 17 years. Now, if you take 17 off 215, this makes this a period of 198 years. So from the end of that chiasm of Joseph, there's 198 years and 54 years here. That is a period of 252 years. Now, remember, we had this structure in 34 AD, and we had this 1764 years, which was divided into 504 and to 1260. And then we could go back to 723 BC, and we could have this period of 756 years. So we know, of course, this is 1260, but this is 3 times 252, and this is 2 times 252, and this is 5 times 252. So we know this is 7 times 252, and that we had already gone back to this history when Jacob dies in 1731, because that was the end of that chiasm, and we saw that this was a period of 1764 years. Now, we had already divided this up as 3 times 252, but we know we have a period of 252 years here, and this is a period of 7 times 252. So when they get rest from their enemies, in maybe I should put the arrows here, because that's the end. They possess the land at the end of 7 years, and then they get rest from their enemies. It's 756 years until Hoshea is taken captive. And so this isn't an accident. When Hoshea is taken captive is part of this structure. And so obviously this is 3 times 252. In this history. And this is 252. Now, if you look at this, looking backwards, you can see that this is 1 times 252, and then these together are 6 times 252. So there's your 7 times 252. And in trying to understand this, we know that this chiasm here, when it ends with the death of Jacob, is now setting up this period all the way to the stoning of Stephen that has this structure of 252. And this, is, of course, is a chiasm. Now, when we think about this, so remember, this is all about the covenant promise to Abraham. And, you know, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. At the death of Jacob, we now set up this structure that goes all the way to 1798. And this is, of course, about the transition from Canaan to Egypt and then getting back to Canaan, to the promised land again. And so here is where they come back to the promised land, here in this history, 1533, and then they get rest from their enemies. And then we have 756 years until Hoshea is taken captive. So that's not an accident. And then this other 756 years to 34 AD. Now, this part of this structure, you know, it depends on the person you're presenting to, but you're not going to be, all this study that I just showed you in this brief period of time is way too much information. Maybe even for us, even if we've studied this a little bit, sometimes we just get fuzzy with all the details. Even I forget the numbers sometimes. This is something that you can show a person, but you have to show it at the right time for each individual. There's not a fixed way to show this information. Now, usually what I do is I show people things and they follow along, and then all of a sudden I jump ahead and I show them a bunch of other stuff. And they say, well, I see what you're talking about, but I'm not going to remember that. And that's okay. It's not like it's wrong to do that, because you can kind of show them where it's going. But, you know, you have to know when a person's had enough and let them push themselves back from the table. So it's, you know, you're not going to feed somebody too much. So you want to give them tastes of things and bit by bit. so that they have an appetite for more. Now, it was interesting. We went to our local church, which is a pretty conservative church. I mean, we had the children's story has all been on Millerite history for the last, year. Of course, we weren't always there because, the church was shut down for a while. But, it's a pretty conservative church, considered the most conservative church in Canada. And our pastor is very good. And he was dealing with how to tell our story, our witness, the story of our conversion. And in doing that, he brought us some very good points. And one of the things in sharing truth with others, we have to use a salesman analogy where the salesman says you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And where the guy who was training this salesman said, your job isn't to make them drink, your job is to make them thirsty. And really that's what we're doing, is we're whetting people's appetite that they want to have more. And it's not about manipulating people. It just has to do with human nature. People cannot take too much. You can't give people more than they can take. But you also don't want to give them everything. That is, you want them to have questions and to want more. And my tendency is not to do that. My tendency is to tell everybody everything. But in reality, people, and one of the reasons I do that is because I'm doing presentations where people should be watching these things over and over if they're interested. I'm not really dealing with an individual step by step. When I'm dealing with individuals, I tend to be a bit better at that. I get to know the person and I answer their questions. I don't start telling them a bunch of things they don't want to hear. At least not usually. Depends. Because sometimes I get excited. But you can see the point of this. We have this line in this structure. Now, where we're leading to is we're going to look at other chiastic structures in other histories. And I've gone through them in detail, the story of Ezra, that the structures there in 457 BC, and the structures in Samuel Snow's letters. But really, it's how these all relate to our time. Now, one of the things that was brought out last night was dealing with this. Now, so this is jumping ahead, trying to apply some of what we learned in the story of Joseph, trying to apply it into our line. Now, we know about this 777 days. This is November 9th. And it was definitely presented better than I'm presenting it here. I'm sort of going a little quickly, but we have this date here, and I want to discuss this a little bit, because one of the things we know is we have this date in the future still. And when it comes to July 18th, this is past, and we have basically agreed, for the most part within this movement, is that we're not going to be setting dates. But we already have this date here, December 25th, 2021. And we know that this comes from 1989 and 1991. So this is the fall of the Berlin Wall, and this is the fall of the Soviet Union on these dates. So we already have this history. We already have this line. And somebody said to me on the WhatsApp group, well, they can accept November 9th because it's 30 years and it's just a fact. But if that's true, we have to accept December 25th, 2021, because it's 30 years and that's a fact. Now, the question is, when we did these lines, and we're going to look at this in more detail when we get to our line, but we know that this we took as before November 9th, we were looking at this as Raphia, and we were looking at this as Panium. And I've made the suggestion that Raphia and Panium are still future, and that they're referring to events. Now these, we can say that these in a sense typify them, but they're not battles between Russia and the United States. In this history, we don't see that. We don't see what we predicted. And we had gone through the study of Millerite history and saw that much of what they predicted didn't happen. Even with August 11th, 1840, they predicted the event of the fall of the Ottoman Empire, at least in some ways, of how they understood it. But all of the things attached to it, the close of probation, the beginning of the plagues and the third woe, and the beginning of the seventh trumpet, none of that happened on August 11th, 1840. So we can look at our history and see we didn't have things happen the way that we expected. But we have to accept that this chronology is correct. And in this chronology, we have 252 and 525 years. And these are upside downs of each other, if you want to look at it as numbers. You turn this upside down and you get a 5 and you get a 2 and you get a 5, right? So these are a type of chiral or something, some kind of mirror image, but not in the way that we would normally look at it. But I guess we could mirror them that way or whatever. But the point is, we know that this is 777 days. However we want to look at this, we can see that they're related to each other, 252 and 525. Now, what Colin did in the study is he lined up this line here, 2 and 5, from the story of Joseph. And what he showed is that this is 2 times 1260. So that this relates to this period of time. This is an analysis. Now, if you're going to make this as 5 and you divide 525 by 5, you're not going to get 5 times 1260, or not 126. You're going to get 5 times 105. And 105 is about the 10th day of the 5th month, which is about the destruction of Jerusalem. And when we looked at our lines and we looked at July 18th, we know that this was about Islam. And then we had this period of 13 days, which is 18,720 minutes, going to July 18th, Julian, and that's the 10th day of the 5th month. So when we look at this line, it's telling us a story about the destruction of Jerusalem, or specifically the temple or the church. And in this context, this has to be about, in this history, this is dealing with Seventh-day Adventism, right? So this is a message to Seventh-day Adventists about the end of Seventh-day Adventism as far as the church is concerned. This is about the Sunday law, which this is where we had put this symbol, December 25th, 2021, was about the Sunday law. And yet we know we're not predicting a Sunday law on December 25th, 2021. In fact, we never did. We just, at least I never did. I would say that this would be the end of the line of the priests, and that the Sunday law we can't predict, but we know that it happens after this time. So we have this period of time now from today, August 16th, to December 25th, 2021. And what we're expecting is an increase of light. That is, if we parallel this with other histories, we know that this is about an increase of light, and we have light coming. And we know what the light is about. The light is about the destruction of Jerusalem. It's about Islam. It's about the Sunday law. And everything that we were presenting and giving a message about prior to July 18 is still valid. That message is still valid. That is, we can't backtrack and say, well, we got off course and now we need to go back somewhere here in our history and then get rid of all these numbers and all these dates because that was time setting and time setting was wrong. We can't do that. That's not what God has showed us. He has showed us that we had to give this message, and he gave us this message. So this message is not the result of us being disobedient. This is the result of God giving an increase of light, what we were able to bear. just as he did with the Millerites. So we're in this increase of light. And in order to have more light, if we were not faithful in giving this message, God couldn't give us any more light. We had to go through this experience. So now what we expect is an increase of light. And that's what's happening. That is, many people now understand July 18th, after July 18th, that didn't understand it before. Even people that had accepted it now are understanding it. But also we're empowered in that we're able to, people who were closed to it before are now open to it. And then also we have this increase of light connected with this message. Now Colin did a much better job of showing this than I'm showing this because he spent more time, but also he brought us through it step by step. But we know that this message is still the same. It's just that we understand more, and we expect to even understand more as we move through this history. And as we go through the chiasms this week, you know, well, we used up a lot of time. So, you know, we're near the end here. So as we go through the chiasms this week, you know, we're going to keep coming back, you know, to the beginning and relating it to the end. And so in each history, all of these histories relate to our history. So by Thursday, when we really study into our history and into the 777 chiasm and its related chiasms, because we have 4 chiasms that I know of in our history here, you know, major ones, and how they're all related to what's happened in the past. And that's the thing that's powerful about this message, because we know that as we pass over the ground of fulfilled prophecy, these events will reflect back upon the past events in types and histories, and they will shine light forward onto our path to guide our feet. So in order, the key to the future is the past, but it's as we go through these histories that we then get that light from the past. These things make much more sense, but also we see things that we never saw before. Now, you know, it's you know, one of the things that if I have a fault as a human being, I mean, I have some, but one of my main faults as far as relating to people is I'm very conciliatory. I'm really a Canadian. I apologize for apologizing. Sorry about that. And I make a bit of a joke on it, but it's a part of my nature that I'm not very bold in the sense of opposing somebody. I'm always looking at when somebody shares something and has a view, I try to take what they're saying and get them to see that, well, there's some truth in what you're saying, but let's see how it relates to what I'm saying, that we're not necessarily as strong as opposition as you think. But sometimes we are in strong opposition. And I can sort of conciliate some of my positions away. I can weaken some of my positions by trying to be nice to what a person is saying. My friend Colin doesn't really do that. He has other ways in which he relates to people, but he's very bold about what he says, and he doesn't give ground where I sometimes will. Now, when it comes to this idea of we were wrong about these events, November 9th was a failed prediction, July 18th, 2020 is a failed prediction. He said, no, they're not failed predictions. Now, he understands what I'm saying, and I understand what he's saying. What he's saying is we did exactly what we were supposed to do. And, you know, it's not necessarily wrong to call them a failed prediction, but we have to be really, really clear that the time elements are correct. And even when we look at December 25th, 2021, we don't say, well, now that we failed in July 18th in time setting, we have to forget about this and forget about this. Because if you get rid of this, this is something that's well-founded. This is extremely powerful truth. And if you start to say, well, here is all of our truth, you know, we don't even have the 273 with March 27th. we just have this, and we just say, basically, these were wrong. We've just destroyed our message. And we don't have a message to give. And if we go back, and this is my point, if we go back and we say, well, we failed, then we have to go back to Millerite history and say they failed. Even though they got October 22nd right, they just had set so many dates, eventually they're going to hit something right. But all their time setting, all their predictions about the shut doors, all the times they thought Jesus was going to come back, I mean, if you use that logic and you were alive in Millerite's day, you wouldn't have accepted the second angel's message. You would have said Millerite's prophecies failed in the spring of 1844. The Jewish year 1843 is totally past. We need to go back, and sure, there was some nice truths that we learned. Jesus is coming back, but all of our dates were wrong. But if you do that, then you have to go back, and you have to go back to the time of Christ, and you have to reject those time prophecies. And there's just so much light that we then have to reject if we believe that these were failures. So these were not failures. These were successes, but they were in God's providence. They weren't what we expected, but they were correct. And we had to do what we had to do. If we had not done them, we would have been, we wouldn't have been good watchmen, right? We would have failed in our duty. And so this is, to me, the important point as we look back at these histories. We can see that they relate to our history, but we have to have this foundation. And this is what we have to show to people. We know that our message is Daniel 11, verse 40 to 45. And in understanding that that's our message, it doesn't mean that we jump to Daniel 11, 40 to 45 as our first study. Because God has given us all this history as a foundation. That is, Adventists need to know that Adventism was founded upon the sure word of prophecy. Because if we are going to go into Daniel 11, 40 to 45 and all of the controversy that exists in that, people aren't going to have anything to hang their faith on. Now, I'm not saying that people can't just accept those things, because the Holy Spirit is what works on a person's heart. But we present some things in Daniel 11, verse 40 to 45, and Daniel 11 altogether, that we have a foundation for drawing those conclusions. And if you just give people your conclusions all the time, you're not helping them learn and grow. And that's what I've been trying to do in going through all this history before July 18. That's why I went through these in so much detail. But now we have to understand them in detail, but we have to know how to present them in simplicity. And so obviously, I'm never presenting anything in these videos in the simplest way only, but I have shown you simple ways in which you can do it. So, it's my suggestion, as I've always said, we need to draw these things out. We need to show them to our spouses. We need to show them to our children. We need to show them to friends. And we don't give them everything all at once. We give them the things that each of those people are individually able to take in. And this, to me, this chiasm and the chiasm in the story of Joseph itself are extremely strong witnesses. And now I present them in the paper on the joining of the two sticks, and I also do presentations on them on my YouTube page, where I go into much more detail. But to me, it all starts with Genesis 15. This is about this covenant made to Abraham, and it deals with the people and the land. And so when we go through this whole history of Israel, we see that this theme shows up again in these symbols of these chiasms. And that's why we need to understand these chiasms. And it was interesting, back in 2018, Parminder did a presentation where he basically tried to destroy the idea of the chiasm. And the way that he did it is that he talked about different types of literary structures, such as parallelisms and chiasms. And I saw what he was doing, and I didn't understand why, because it didn't really make sense to me back in 2018 why he was doing this. But he was basically saying that the chiasm is nothing, the parallelism is nothing, except, and I'm kind of paraphrasing a bit, but except the message itself is what's important, and the chiasm is just a way of showing that. Well, that's partially true. But the thing is, the chiasm is the fingerprint of the covenant. And the chiasm, and obviously these are literary chiasms here, these are chronological chiasms, and these are the fingerprint of the covenant, and this is the work of Palmoni, to lock all these things together. So he was weakening the chiasm because he saw how strong it could be as a witness against him. And so now we know that we have to understand these chiasms. These are extremely powerful images that you can show people. As, the most important thing in the Bible is the chiasm, because this is the cross. Christ crucified is a chiasm. And it's a chiasm more than just in one way, because we know that when Jesus was crucified, there's two classes of worshipers here, one on either side of him, the two thieves, right? And so this this chiasm here, Christ shows us this visible chiasm. When he's hanging upon a cross, it's a chiasm. And in all chiasms, you have these transitions, or you have these two parts, Canaan and Egypt, Leah and Rachel, plenty and famine. The thief, who accepted Christ, and the thief who rejected Christ. And so these chiasms become, this is the gospel. And when we understand that there's a power in this message. And again, it's not about chronology and numbers and chiasms per se. It's about the cross. But these are the tools that God has given us because he illustrates them in this way. And that's why this is powerful. So I hope as we go through this study this week that I can do justice to these ideas. But I know that my job is to make you thirsty, and hopefully you have a desire to continue digging in these things, and also making other people thirsty, other people having this desire to look in these things. We know angels desire to look into these things that we are studying. These are very profound truths, but they can be presented in very simple ways. And a person, as they accept light, can advance. So we believe that we're having this increase of light at this time. I've seen it in just in my personal study and in the studies that we've had, but I've seen it in other people's studies, other things that people have shared with me, other people who are looking at these structures. And Adilio did put something recently as well, which I haven't read thoroughly. And so I think that, as God continues to lead this movement, we're going to see some difficulties coming. So one is we're going to see a separation of two classes. So there are going to be a group of people who don't really accept July 18th, and they want to go back. We also see another class that is going to continue to set dates for events. But we know that what we have to do is we have to recognize where God has led, examine those things. The way that Colin put it is we have to review and herald. We have to review these truths and then give this message. And so this is the work that God's given us to do right now. And it's a small work. My view is, I've said many times, like I've looked at what my role is personally, and I think my role is to do the little things that God gives me to do, and not to try to accomplish some big thing. And if everybody does the little things that God's given them to do, then this work will go forward. But if people look for somebody else to accomplish the things that is really their responsibility, this work will stagnate. And so I believe that God is empowering you to give a message because he's giving you light, and you have to begin to share that light. And if you don't share that light, your light will go out. You have to be able to figure out how to do this, and you have to pray about it. You have to say, God, what is it that I need to do? Because often we look at ourselves and say, I can't do anything. We look at other people and say they got so many talents and abilities, and they, but it's not in the numbers of people that you minister to. It's just in the fact that God gives you a ministry, and you know that it's there, that there are people that God is asking you to talk to, and it's not always going to be easy. So there's my appeal on that level. So any final questions? I know I always am just talking and I'm not getting much discussion going, but is there any final questions or any thoughts or comments that people would like to say?
Okay, I'm going to throw something out based upon Colin's comments last night.
Yeah, and you saw that,
yes.
right? So, yeah.
I watched.
Yeah.
Okay. July 18th. If we look at July 18th as a test, in the same way that Saul was tested when he was told that Samuel would be to this location before the battle. And Saul failed the test because he didn't wish to wait for Samuel. He inserted himself into the role as a priest.
Right. So one of the things that Colin was talking about is we're in a tarrying time, and Saul was told to tarry and he didn't, right? So that's the context in which you're talking about.
That's part of the context, yes.
Okay.
But what I'm asking is, what if July 18th was a test for us to know if we were going to depend on God, that we were going to give a message that was not going to be popular, that we were going to present a message for people's consideration so that God could reveal our characters just as Saul's character was revealed?
Yes. I think that's really clear, which is one of the things that Colin was bringing out, and you're just stating it in a sort of succinct way. So we were definitely being tested in this movement, and the question is, what kind of characters are we going to manifest? And we did our duty, right? But we're still tarrying, right? We still have to tarry. And what Saul says, well, I forced myself, and because you were late, and so I sacrificed. Well, of course, that's the thing, is that people were impatient. We need to have the patience of the saints, and that is waiting upon God to accomplish what he says he's going to accomplish. So what Colin was saying is, the event's going to happen. And when it does happen, God will have a people that will then be ready at that time. Because right now we weren't ready. We weren't ready for Nashville.
Exactly correct.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks for that. So that that was an important point. I didn't deal with that. But now, if you would like me to send you Colin's presentation, I can do that. You can just do that on email, but you can't post it up on YouTube or Facebook or anything. So if you want to receive that, just raise your hand. On the, there's a way to do that somehow. You can raise your hand and ask for that. Or I can just say, if nobody objects, all the people that are here in this meeting here, I can send it to you. So Dana raised her hand. And so forth.
I'm not raising my hand, but yeah, I'd like that.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that just the people that are here right now, I'll send
also
you
need
this.
that.
Yeah. And so I just gotta.
If you click where it says participants, and then to the lower right, you will see where it says raise hand once you brought up the window for participants.
Yeah. Well, actually, it was Angela that raised her hand. But, so So I'll just assume each of you, I'll just send you a copy of the video. Obviously, it's a fairly large file. Not everybody can download those files. It'll obviously go into Dropbox or something like that. But yeah, I just can't, I could, somehow create another YouTube page that's just a private one and only people who subscribe can watch those YouTube videos. I know there's a way to do that. But Colin doesn't really want it on YouTube or Facebook. So it's up to him, right? But anyway, thanks everyone for that. So we've got a few more people who want the video. So let's close with prayer, and then we can say our goodbyes. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for the study this morning. We know that there's still much we don't understand, and we know that we have struggles as we go through this time, uncertainties in our own lives, uncertainties in the message. And yet we pray for the people in this message, even those that appear to be struggling in whether this message is true or not in all of its aspects. But we just ask, Lord, that you can help us to be faithful and to not tarry, or as we tarry, to not reject that light, to not go ahead of you and to become impatient. Help us to have that patience. And also, Lord, we ask that you can be with each person who watches this video and leadership in this message. We pray for our church and the church members and the friends that we have. We know, Lord, that there's a lot of work before us, and we ask for your help. Thank you for the study, for hearing our prayer, and we pray that you can bring us again together tomorrow morning to study these things further. Thank you, and we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Theodore.
Okay, you're welcome.